Hello and welcome back to everyone. We began this program with the Jain tradition, and Bhaktamar Sutra we saw is an entire shloka, many syllables in the Sanskrit language. And we moved with a shorter mantra in the Sikh tradition. And in Jainism, in Sikhism, in Buddhism, and in Hinduism, the mantra is so important, so foundational. And we're moving now into a segment of the program. We'll continue to mix and match throughout the next several presentations into tomorrow. But we're now very happy to welcome someone from Maharishi University of Management. And Dr. Lonsdorf is well known for her good work there. And as the Doshas were strategizing and planning on how best to honor Dr. Hagelin, we knew, we were reminded by the Doshas that, in fact, the very first Ayurveda to be brought to this country was by disciples of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And this has now blossomed into, as with the Sikh tradition, so many Americans who have taken up the wisdom from Ayurveda, translating it into the North American context. And as we hear from Dr. Lonsdorf, we will continue the conversation. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I chose this topic because I think it's actually one of the most important things that I can tell my patients and that they can adopt that will have the most far-reaching effects on their health. How many of you are very mindful of your daily routine? Like you want to have lunch by a certain time, you want to go to bed by a certain time, which would be fairly early, maybe 10 o'clock-ish. So maybe a third or 40% of you. And I imagine, do you feel good when you go to bed and you eat on time and all of that? You feel good? I guess that's why you do it, huh? So actually, when I first started my practice, integrating Ayurveda into my medical practice, it was 1987 January in Washington, D.C. And I had the directorship of the Marcie Ayurveda Medical Center a few blocks from the White House. And that was a time where the AMA and the FDA and all those organizations were feeling very threatened by anything that wasn't Western medicine. So I kind of every day half expected somebody was going to knock on my door, and every day I was grateful that nobody did. And alternative medicine was sort of like, almost like a criminal word. And today, people really are embracing, as you know, alternative approaches. They really want to be healthy, truly healthy. They want to help their health without hurting it through Western medicine, which is great for acute problems, for injuries, for trauma. If something has really gone awry, you need to save a life. We need Western medicine. However, for those chronic conditions that so many of us experience, creeping in here or there due to our lifestyle or the passage of time or stresses that we might undergo, we know that the little pill the doctor gives us is just not adequate, and it doesn't really make us feel healthier. So that's why I'm sure you're all here. And I wanted to talk about time. When I first started my practice, this is 31 years ago, almost everything that I was saying, even though I was, trained in Western and was mindful of the person's health history and making sure I wasn't missing something that needed a Western treatment, yet everything I was telling them Ayurvedically was basically on faith. It was on, some resonance with that wisdom that would resonated with me as common sense, and when I tried it in my life, it made a difference. In fact, when I started Ayurveda, I was convinced because I was a very tired intern at Stanford, eating hospital food for the first time in my life, and being up many nights, all night. And by the end of it, I was really feeling very out of balance in ways I'd never felt out of balance. And I heard some of my friends at the meditation center talking about going away to some place where they do some kind of spa treatment. And it sounded a little scary for a person from Wisconsin. No offense to my fellow Wisconsinites, but this was 1984. And to hear of, the cleansing part and the basti, I barely knew what an enema was. So, but I was desperate. So I signed up for a 3-day treatment, and fortunately, they had a very big cancellation fee because a couple days before I chickened out and I was going to cancel, and it was just too expensive, so I went anyway, and that was kind of how history got created in my life. So the massages were great, the oil on the forehead was great. The basti was, I can say, powerful. And I mitigated by bottles of Mylanta from the grocery store, which also had a very cleansing effect. So I definitely had the result I was supposed to have. But the bottom line was I felt so good for months afterwards. It wasn't just like you go to a spa, you feel great while you're there, for a day or two after you're okay, and then it's just as bad as it was before. I knew something had really changed in my body. And I knew that this Ayurveda had some deep wisdom that was real. It was scientific. It was really happening on a molecular level. And when I had the opportunity to start to practice it, one of my colleagues called me up and said, "We'd really like you to come and help us with our new clinics." And I must say that if I hadn't been so miserable with Western medicine and giving my patients drugs, and at that time their psychotherapy was really ineffective. Now there's some things like cognitive that are better, but at that time I really didn't feel like I was able to heal anyone. So I took them up on it, and after a few months, once the patients started coming back, and with the little I knew, which was about like what I'm going to tell you today, I was starting to see people really feel better. So this was extremely fulfilling to me, and I said, no matter what, I'm glad I left Stanford in the middle of my residency. So I never looked back. It's 30 years later. Somehow it's continued to work. So what has been very fulfilling to me, and I think to all of you, as you start to see these articles coming out in major medical journals about things that you can understand with a common sense mind and that are actually validating Ayurvedic principles, it's really been maybe only the last 10 to 12 to 15 years that things have been coming out that actually put a scientific validation behind what I was saying and to all my patients and doing in my life. And so that's the excitement with which I share this. It's just a taste, because every day, every month, more and more of these articles are coming out. So I wanted to start by just saying what we'll talk about, a little bit about time and our bodies and health and what keeps biological time. And by the way, this has been recognized now in Western medicine as such an important factor that just last week the Nobel Prize was given to the discoverer of the circadian rhythm. So I feel like it's a very timely time to give this talk, pardon the pun. So we'll talk about a little bit about what Ayurveda says about time and research findings that validate that. Actually, one of my patients, about 7 years ago here in California, came to me. She's a 64-year-old woman, very thin, about 115 pounds, 5'5", looked like she was in great shape. But she told me that actually she was there to see me because she had been diagnosed with atherosclerosis and had been pretty severe. And I couldn't imagine when I first looked at her, how could that be? You've never been overweight, you exercise, you do meditation now. What could it be? And when I went deeply into the history, she shared with me that she had really trouble sleeping. So she would go to sleep. She tried to go to bed early, but after a few hours, she'd wake up, maybe at 2 o'clock or something, couldn't get back to sleep. So she'd get up, she'd work the rest of the night, and she would usually eat around that time because she'd get hungry. And she was very sleep deprived, and she was also way off on her biological rhythm. So I thought, well, maybe this is what happens. We know, we'll talk about it in a minute with a slide as well, that what happens when we are off rhythm is that our body doesn't function optimally. And things go off, like our digestion goes off, and then the next thing that happens is we accumulate waste and impurities in the body. That's the ama. It builds up and it clogs the shrotas, which her shrotas that were clogged were her arteries. So that cholesterol got oxidized, probably due to all the stress of being up so late, and got laid down in her arteries. So she actually shared with me later that she found that she is very sensitive to herbs. So she said actually what she found was the most helpful, and she had a kind of a poignant note to me, which I lost with some slide issues today, but she said that, thank you so much. I found that I have been doing the routine you said. I stay in bed no matter if I wake up or not, and now my sleep is getting better. And she said, my digestion's getting better, and I find that I feel more energy during the day. And she said, these small changes have made the biggest impact in my health more than any other herb ever has. So again, as Ayurveda says, without proper diet, we could add routine, then medicines are of no use. And with proper diet and routine, medicines are of no need. So here we have just a kind of a pictorial of how we as humans are connected to the rhythms of the environment around us. Actually, the circadian rhythm, the light, is biggest in fact on us on a daily basis. Then, especially for women, the lunar rhythm, which creates the menstrual timing, and then the solar, the seasonal. And actually, when I gave this talk 4 years ago, I must say I didn't look for seasonal rhythms because I wanted to talk about the daily routine, and I had only 12 minutes, so. But I thought, seasonal is going to be 10 years from now. Somebody will think to study the seasons. Well, I was very naive because somebody after my talk said, oh, Dr. Lonsdorf, you should know about some seasonal changes that happen. And so I'm going to include those today. It's really fascinating. So light comes in from the sun. It falls on our retina. There are cells in our retina that have proteins called melanopsin that send signals back to the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain. And that is our master clock. And in fact, every day, with that sun and that rising sun and the light, our master clock is being reset. So it's being recalibrated every day. And I'm sure that recalibration, because that time is changing every day. Days are getting right now shorter. So that's telling the brain that the season is changing at the same time that it's telling us when the day starts. So we actually, in addition to this master clock in the brain, a few years ago, it was discovered that there are clock genes in almost every cell, and I would imagine if they look hard enough, they will find it in every cell, that are keeping a rhythm, kind of local time. So we got the GPS time, the global whatever time, and then we got the local time. And these clock genes, ideally, everything is an agreement. The clock up here is saying, okay, it's night, it's time to go to sleep. Okay, it's lunchtime, it's time to eat. Okay, it's midnight, it's time to purify. But what happens if we eat a midnight snack when the liver in the body wants to purify? Well, dutifully, some genes will turn on that are usually sleeping then, and they'll start to digest that food and metabolize it. But it won't do that good a job because the whole context is wrong. The rest of the liver isn't really primed, and the other part of the digestive tract and the body's cells and tissues are not really ready at that time to process the food. So that's why we say in Ayurveda, when you eat at the wrong times, you accumulate ama. The food is not fully digested. That goes down lower in your gut. That creates the inflammation. That creates the leaky gut. Ayurveda knew this. I was saying this 30 years ago, mind you, that this causes food that's not fully digested to get absorbed across the lining. And these undigested molecules are not fully broken down fat, sugar, and protein. They can be seen by the immune system as something it doesn't want. So therefore, it starts to attack it. And that's the beginning of autoimmune. First, maybe just joint pains or something that's not autoimmune. And then later, there's cross-reactivity with our normal tissue. One really important principle one of my first mentors taught me that I'll never forget, and I just love it. He said, the body is always trying to heal itself. It's not trying to, by mistake, attack our thyroid or our joints or whatever. It's all part of the healing process. It may have gone awry a bit due to various factors, but the body's always trying to heal itself. So we have to look at what's gone wrong. What are we doing in our lifestyle or our diet that is causing the body to go out of balance and then leading up to this condition? So time as a major cause of disease, Ayurveda identified it. There are 3 major causes. Time, kala, parnam is the last one. So wrong use, overuse, and underuse of time, and then intellect and the senses are the 3-fold causes of disease. And that gets mediated into imbalance and disease through mistakes we're making in diet, in our daily life, and also mental causes, which we won't go into today, but we're going to hear from Dr. Suhas Shirsagar tonight. Pragyaprad, I think he's going to go into it in depth, but it means mistaken of the intellect. It means that what we're seeing and how we're thinking things is not really the way they are, or it's in a way that is not in service to us. So those of you who speak Sanskrit will have to forgive me, but it's something like Vayu Ahu Ratri Bhuktanam Teyanta Madhya Adiga Kramat. And what this saying from the Ashtang Hridaya says basically is that Vata, Pitta, Kapha, actually kind of in the back order, Kapha, Pitta, Vata, are sequentially predominant. The beginning, middle, and end of age, like childhood, middle age, and senior years, day, night, and after meals. So this is the clue. It's a sutra. And this sutra does not mean, just because it's one little thing somewhere in these texts, it doesn't mean it's not important. It's actually the seed of a whole important aspect of our health. So the doshas, how many don't know the doshas? A few people? So you will. But Dr. John Hagelin, actually, this is one of my favorite slides. He's going to go deeply into this, but the doshas are basically aspects of natural law and organizing principles that are present as the unified field, that undifferentiated, just pure being manifests into matter. And in that medium area, in that transition area, these guiding principles guide. Vata guides all movement, flow, Pitta all fire and transformation, and Kapha all structural elements. So all of what's going on in the top of the slide actually has a basis in the bottom. And to really help ourselves heal, we want to understand what's going on in this very basic level as well and address that, not just the superficial levels. So just for you who really want to know, Kapha time, heaviness, sleep is best. If we start in the evening, sleep between 6 and 10. And actually research on chronotypes shows that people who do go to bed earlier report better quality of sleep and less work-related fatigue, even if they sleep the same number of hours. Pitta is the digestive time, metabolic time. Digestion strongest, we want to eat our main meal at noon or somewhere a little before or after. Vata time, 2 to 6. Mind is alert, but that's the best time, actually. It's a good time for yoga because we're most flexible. It's also a good time to get up by 6 because then we'll be dominated by that alertness that comes at that time of day rather than sleeping late. Now, in our modern society, some of us are like Marcie. To her credit, she's self-imposed 1 cup of coffee a day, but she still has a ways to go. She's in coaching right now and trying to keep working on it. Ayurvedic daily schedule. What I want to touch on are 3 basic principles of Ayurveda, give you a few of now a growing body of studies that validate these principles. So if you want to lose weight, you want to have healthy digestion, start to eat your main meal at noon and a lighter meal in the evening. Go to bed by 10 if you want the best quality sleep and the best mood the next day. And exercise in the Kapha time, 6 to 10 in the morning or evening if you can handle exercise in the evening. How many more minutes do I have? I don't want to go over here.
15.
Okay. So timing of food. This is a study that was done, published in the International Journal of Obesity. with 420 subjects. What they did was have them eat the same number of calories, but half the group ate those calories, the majority of them, before 3 p.m. The other ate them after 3 p.m. And we know in our culture, most people work all day and just kind of shove a little bit in here and there to keep going, and then they come home and they have a big meal. What happened, what they found was that actually those people who ate the same number of calories before 3 p.m., the majority, actually this is backwards. I like to say the positive, but those people who ate it after 3 p.m. did not lose as much weight and were slower to lose it. So if you want to normalize your weight, you want to help it by riding the wave. It's sort of like you go out to the ocean here and you ride the waves, or you try to swim out against them. That's the difference in your body. Bedtime. How many of you have a bedtime? Good. You know, I think everybody should remember that they have this bedtime that mothers and fathers impose, less and less, unfortunately, these days. I think kids are staying up later and later, and probably that's why, from this study, that we're getting more children who are depressed, committing suicide. Very, very, very big problem in high school and colleges. So anyway, this was a study on students, and the question was, well, if we make the students go to bed earlier, by 10, well, they kind of cheated, but they still went to bed quite a bit earlier than the ones who were allowed to stay up till midnight. Would they do better in school? Would they have better mood? Yes. They found out those kids who stayed up at midnight versus going to bed early had 24% more depression, 20% more suicidal thoughts. So the idea here is we could cut suicides in by at least 20% if we just had our children go to bed earlier. Bedtime matters. It's not just the quantity. Some people say, well, you go to bed later, you don't sleep as much. But this was another study controlling for the amount of sleep time. And they found that kids who went to bed early, 6 to 8 years later, they still had, the ones who stayed up late again. They were worse in their educational outcomes in terms of their grades and in terms of advancing in their degrees, and they had more emotional distress. This is 6 to 8 years later than when they started the study. So they also found that late summer bedtime, you think you can get away with it in the summer, but it was highly related to emotional distress, although not grade point average. So it's just really not good for the brain. We can't regenerate our neurotransmitters properly if we go to bed late. I love this quote. Somebody sent it to me because I guess I didn't get it quite right. Is there anything, once Chark was asked by an assembly of great Vaidya's, is there anything that balances all 3 doshas, all 7 dhatus, all the waste elimination, promotes ojas, increases sattva, purity, and is suitable for all ages, can be done in all seasons, well, maybe not in Wisconsin, everywhere in the world, and does not cost anything? And he said, yes, wake up early in the morning and take a walk. So let's look at that. There are a couple different points here. Oh, he said, take a walk in the light of the rising sun. So there are a couple of factors. 1 is getting up early, 2 is exercising, and 3 is walking outside, being outside. So let's look at the exercise piece. Morning exercise and cardiovascular risk. This was studying hypertension, or pre-hypertensives. And at night, our blood pressure should drop, and that's good for our heart. If it doesn't drop, it's like kind of a sign that there's excess stress on the heart and is a precursor to blood pressure going up further and heart disease. So they're called non-dippers. What they did was have people exercise 30 minutes, either in the morning, lunchtime, or evening. What they found, indeed, was those who exercised at 7 a.m. had the greatest drop in their blood pressure during the night. And counterintuitively, you think, okay, well, at 7 p.m., we're going to be all charged up. It's going to be harder to drop the blood pressure at night, right? Well, no, they came in second, and they actually had the greatest drop in the lower number. And lunchtime is not a good time. I was so happy to hear that because when I was doing my residency, my buddies would go out running around the Stanford like circle and the heat of the day at lunchtime, and I would usually go and maybe catch a few minutes of meditation and eat my vegetarian sandwich. And I did feel a little guilty, but now I know that I was doing something that was better for me. So this is just the slide that shows that mean nighttime blood pressure is lowest in those exercising at 7 a.m., highest in those exercising in the middle of the day, and kind of medium if you exercise at night. Now, the second piece was morning light, and this was a study that came out a year or so ago from Northwestern, really fascinating. What they did was take young people, put activity monitors on them, and see when they got up, when they went to sleep, how many hours they slept, and when they were exposed to light of a certain intensity that would be correlated with outdoor light. What they found, they had to do extremely sophisticated algorithmic calculations, and what they found was a relationship only when they factored in three things. It had to be at least 500 lux or greater, before noon, and at least 20 minutes. And what they found was that those people who got that triad on a regular basis had lower body weight, regardless of the calories that they ingested, and regardless of the number of the sleep that they got, the hours of sleep. So this was one of the very complicated, the most simple of the complicated graphs that they have in their paper. But you see down here, the earlier in the day the light happened, these people are lighter in weight. The later in the day that they get their light, they're higher in weight. This is 4 p.m. and that's 8 a.m. Now, this is I just throw this in here because it's kind of a monkey wrench in the theory. And those of you who like to do research, I encourage you to figure this out. It turns out that, there's evening chronotypes and morning chronotypes. Evening chronotypes do have higher health factor risk for cardiovascular disease and some other things, and they report less good quality of sleep, as I mentioned before. But here, it was a study on women with breast cancer, and it found that if they were going to sleep against, like if they were an early to bed person, they were going to bed late, that impacted their disease-free interval tremendously. If they were misaligned, they lived an average of 46 months, 4 years. If they were aligned, they went to bed early, if that's what their style was, they lived 82 months. Now, it apparently even worked for those who like to go to bed late. If their spouse who was an Ayurvedic practitioner was telling them, no, you have to come now, it's 9:30, you have to come now, that wasn't so good either. They didn't do as well. So maybe these things aren't absolute, but maybe, I don't know about these chronotypes. I would like to learn more about it. Somehow I think, I don't know. I like to say that it's cumulative habit from childhood or something, and it's not really a genetic chronotype, but we'll see. Circadian disruption in cancer patients also, here it showed, increased their fatigue, loss of appetite, sleep disorders, poor disease-free interval, as we saw. So one of the recommendations that these researchers put into cancer patients was that they should follow a routine, and it should be timed to what is ideal for promoting health. And also the drugs that they get, which is a whole nother story, that chemotherapy agents, some of them, if you give them at 12 at night, midnight, they will have virtually no toxicity and will really be powerful against the cancer. But if you have the same drug at noon, it's opposite, lots of side effects and not as effective. And I think that that's a very big body of knowledge that is being ignored largely because of inconvenience. The center's open from 9 to 5 and people come and get their chemo. But more and more I see that patients are getting the option to take it home, and I'm hoping that they are getting that education as to when they should be giving their treatment. Also, fertility is also impacted by, if you're feeding the animal, the fly, at the wrong time, it affects its fertility. So we could think for maybe women who have an irregular schedule and eating habits and are having irregular periods, or fertility problems, that might be one thing that might be helpful for them. We always say that. Those of us who practice Ayurveda say, well, you're aggravating your Vata, so you're disturbing your cycle and you're weakening your fertility. So have a regular routine, eat these Vata-pacifying foods, and don't run marathons during this time. And I personally have patients who wrote back and thanked me and said, look, within 2 months of doing this, I got pregnant. So it's October 6th. Heads up, your genes are changing. Did you know that? This is adding credence to the Ayurvedic knowledge that there are seasonal rhythms, and at the change of season, we always say that at the change of season, we're more vulnerable. We should do a little cleansing. We should drink a lot of hot water and have soupy food and not be eating garbage. Never should eat garbage, but we really should watch not eating too heavy at night. It's a good time to do something extra, especially the last week before the equinox and the week afterwards. So this is a wonderful paper that you might enjoy reading. Widespread seasonal gene expression reveals annual differences in human immunity and physiology. This is one of the first of which will probably end up being hundreds and thousands of papers that will come out showing so many of our genes are actually seasonally timed. In fact, they found that 5,000 genes, so far they found 25% of our genome, the gene expression changes dramatically with the season. Here's an example of seasonality of hormone receptor genes, which you can imagine with animals. How do they know to mate in the fall or in the spring or whatever is natural for them? Well, it's all built into the brain. It's all affecting their hormones at different times. And this is a beautiful graph that shows hormone receptors high in the late winter, and then in the summer they're low. And other ones are low in the winter and high in the summer. And look at this intersection point. It correlates right here, I would say, somewhere between the end of March and into mid-April. Exact Ritu Sandhi, the junction of the seasons. And the same right now, September, look, 25% of your genes they're not in their fully powered up state or their fully powered down state. So you could think that's kind of a delicate time for the body. So drink hot water now. Don't have cheese at night. Maybe do a little gentle cleanse. Eat lots of vegetables. Cooked ones, because we don't want to aggravate Vata. So here again, beautiful seasonality, up, down, beautiful sine waves intersecting at the season. This is adipose tissue, which, depending on the gene we need and where we live, we might need more of it in the winter to stay warm. Here also, various conditions like asthma and bronchitis, they are increased, and this just shows the activity of these genes that mediate asthma and inflammation. And in the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere, and we see that they're in direct opposite. Australia here is going down, these genes, whereas the US and UK, Ireland are going up this summer. So it's a season effect. Our genes aren't reading the calendar. Just one last thought for the spiritual aspect of this. Health is swasthya, established in the self. And the experience of transcendence, of going beyond the relative and experiencing that non-changing eternal self within us, is an experience of timelessness. We lose track of time. We don't know if it's been a few moments or if it's been a few hours. And here's what Charaka says about that experience of timelessness. Direct contact with the least excited state of awareness, Atma, is the most powerful means of promoting health. Completely transcending mental activity, just experiencing the mind, just its fullness of being Satchitananda without all the activity, is the best among the sources of health and happiness. And indeed, here's just one study that's quite powerful on people practicing transcendental meditation who learned because they were having heart disease and they were in a study, and those people were followed for several years, 5 years or more. And what they found was the group that had been randomized to TM had, over time, they'd all had heart attacks once and at a high risk for a second one. They had 47% less heart attack, stroke, and death. And if a pill could do that, believe me, our doctors would be pushing it even more than statins. So the last thing I wanted to just mention to you, if you are interested in, if you're a health professional, my colleague Stuart Rothenberg and I teach a course, and it's my great joy to do that. I just love to teach the pulse. And in fact, I see we have 2-3 minutes left. Why don't we all take our pulse? I think it's a neglected self-healing technique. And as Dr. Hagelin is going to talk about quantum mechanics, from our metaphor here, we're going to say this is a quantum mechanical technique because we are putting our attention on a system that actually has a quantum mechanical or even beyond basis. Remember, we go all the way down to the unified field. So when we take our pulse, we're putting our attention on a quantum mechanical system, and that by measurement theory, we're going to change it. And when we're innocently observing the pulse, just easily, quietly, letting our awareness just be observing it, then we are creating that wholeness and that silence that supports our body's holistic functioning and helps to balance the doshas, and we don't even have to think about it. So let's just take a moment of silence here at the end to take our pulse. Anyone feel their pulse slowing down a bit? Or maybe getting a little stronger or a little softer? How many people felt their pulse change some way? Yeah, so you're seeing that effect. If you do this every day, maybe if you have joint pain, it could get better. I have patients who told me before they took the pulse course, they had arthritis for years and their hands hurt. They told me after a few weeks of taking the pulse, all of a sudden they realized their hands weren't hurting anymore. And I've had 3 other patients since then tell me the same thing. So just by increasing that self-referral, that's the essence of Ayurveda, is self-referral. It's consciousness curving back on itself, enlivening the wholeness that is greater than the sum of the parts, and that's nurturing and creating balance everywhere when we give it a chance. So take your pulse and enjoy. Go to bed early tonight, those of you who are morning types, and if you're evening, go to bed maybe earlier. And I wish you all the best of health. Take care. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one question. Yes, please, right here.
You had mentioned the importance of cycles, and you mentioned among various types of cycles, the lunar cycle. Has there been any research with respect to meditation experiences with respect to, say, the full moon, for example? For example, greater bliss, more pure awareness from that?
There are more
particular-
psychiatric admissions.
Well, it's interesting, though. What I've noticed in my experience and those of others is that the longer one meditates, the more bliss there is in the full moon, whereas the opposite is true. If someone doesn't have a practice, then there's that greater likelihood of the craziness.
That's
the
very
lunatics.
I think that if someone studies this, for sure they'll find a difference. And the moon, and is connected in the Ayurvedic knowledge to soma. Soma is the link between the wholeness and the parts. It's very connected to ojas, which, both of those have bliss and evenness and good feeling as at their basis. So, yeah, I would think that it would. That's a very interesting question. How many of you who practice meditation feel that your meditations are more blissful around the full moon? Quite a few of you. So somebody should do the paper. Thank you.
Thank you.